Now to the latest on a catastrophic flooding devastating Michigan after those two dams collapsed.
Over the past 200 years, dam failures have killed more than 250,000 people. Some were caused by war, others by greed, many by simple human error.
Saved from the sludge, their daring rescue captured on camera.
When it comes to engineering, we put our trust in structures that are meant to control nature's most powerful force: water. Dams, massive concrete and earthen barriers, stand between human life and devastating floods. But what happens when those structures fail? Some of the deadliest catastrophes in history were the result of dam failures. Tens of thousands of lives lost, entire communities wiped off the map, and economies shattered. So, why did these disasters happen? Today, we're going to look at 9 of the most catastrophic dam failures in history, exploring the causes, impacts, and the critical lessons that followed. It's not just about failure, it's about understanding how these events shape the future of engineering. Stay with us. This is a story you'll want to hear. You'll see how a single overlooked crack in France doomed 423 people, why a mining company's greed buried entire Brazilian villages, and the haunting reason China's deadliest disaster that killed 230,000 people remained secret for decades. But first, let's start with a dam so poorly designed, it lasted just 5 months before unleashing chaos. A project rushed through despite engineers' protests, proving that when we ignore nature's warnings, it will always win. The Teton Dam was located in Idaho and was designed to hold back the waters of the Teton River for flood control and irrigation purposes. The dam itself was an earthen structure, which means it was made up primarily of dirt and rock. The goal was to provide water to the area's farms and prevent flooding in the surrounding regions. Unfortunately, this plan went horribly wrong when the dam failed on June 5, 1976. The failure happened due to a combination of poor construction and design flaws. While the dam had been built with good intentions, the foundation was not as solid as it should have been. A section of the dam began to leak, and despite warnings from workers who noticed the issue, the situation was not addressed quickly enough. When water started seeping through the dam, it was a sign of the underlying problems with its structure. Eventually, the pressure from the water caused the dam to collapse. The result was devastating. When the dam failed, it sent a massive wall of water rushing downstream. The floodwaters destroyed homes, roads, and bridges in its path. Sadly, 11 people lost their lives, and many more were displaced from their homes. But the physical destruction was not the only consequence. The failure also brought into question the safety standards of dams across the country. The aftermath was a wake-up call for the engineering world. The Teton Dam failure highlighted the importance of proper construction techniques and the need for continuous monitoring of dam integrity. It also led to significant changes in how dams were inspected and maintained, ensuring that future disasters could be avoided. Though the Teton Dam disaster didn't result in the massive death toll seen with other dam failures, it still stands as a reminder of the importance of design and safety when it comes to major infrastructure projects. A similar disaster occurred just a few decades earlier in England. Let's look at that next. The Dyke Reservoir, built in the early 1860s near Sheffield, England, was intended to supply water to the growing industrial city. It was a large man-made reservoir designed to capture the water flowing from the nearby hills. But on March 11, 1864, disaster struck. A massive breach in the dam's wall sent millions of gallons of water cascading down into the valley below, sweeping away everything in its path. So, what caused the collapse? It turns out that poor construction and a lack of proper inspections played a major role in the disaster. The dam, which was built with untested materials, had a structural flaw that weakened it over time. On the day of the collapse, heavy rainfall made the dam's already vulnerable structure even more unstable. When the dam finally gave way, the floodwaters tore through the valley, flooding homes and causing widespread damage. The human cost of the collapse was devastating. More than 240 people were killed when the water surged through the valley. Many of them were asleep when the flood hit, unable to escape in time. The disaster became one of the deadliest dam failures in British history, and it sent shockwaves through the country. The flood caused immense property damage, and it took years to recover from the loss of life and infrastructure. But the next disaster on our list was even more tragic. Let's now move to Brazil, where the Brumadinho Tailings Dam occurred. In January 2019, Brazil was rocked by one of the most devastating industrial disasters in recent history. The Brumadinho Tailings Dam, owned by the mining giant Vale, collapsed without warning. This was not just any ordinary dam failure. This was a massive release of mining waste, a slurry of toxic mud and water, which completely wiped out everything in its path. So, what exactly happened that day? The Brumadinho Dam had been in use for years, holding back waste from iron ore mining operations. Unlike traditional dams that hold back water, tailings dams store mining waste, which is often a dangerous combination of chemicals and heavy metals. Over time, these dams can become extremely unstable if not properly maintained. In the months leading up to the collapse, there were several signs that the dam was in trouble. Cracks had appeared in the structure, and there were concerns about its overall stability. However, despite these red flags, the company and authorities did not take the necessary steps to reinforce or monitor the dam more closely. On January 25, 2019, disaster struck. At around 12:28 p.m., the dam suddenly gave way. The collapse unleashed a wall of toxic mud, which flowed down the valley at an overwhelming speed. The force of the sludge was so powerful that it completely destroyed everything in its path, including a nearby administrative building, a community, roads, and bridges. The town of Brumadinho, which was just a few kilometers away from the dam, was hit the hardest. It was not just the massive loss of property and infrastructure, it was the human toll. The mudslide killed at least 270 people. Miners, workers at the company's administrative offices, and residents of the area. Many of the victims were buried under tons of debris and sludge, unable to escape in time. But the impact of the Brumadinho disaster didn't stop there. The environmental consequences were severe. The toxic waste that flooded the surrounding area contaminated the land and water, creating a long-term hazard for both the environment and the local population. The mining operation, which was already a huge business, left behind an even greater environmental mess in its wake. What happened next was a wave of outrage. The Brazilian government, along with the international community, took immediate action. Investigations were launched to determine how Vale had failed to prevent such a catastrophe and whether the company's negligence had played a direct role. It didn't take long for Vale to be accused of criminal negligence, and the company faced massive lawsuits and reputational damage. In the aftermath, Brazil took steps to address the risks of tailings dams. Laws were introduced to strengthen regulations and improve monitoring of these structures. It also forced the mining industry to reevaluate how it handles waste disposal and safety practices. The Brumadinho disaster made it clear that the safety of tailings dams must be treated with the same seriousness as any other major infrastructure, as their failure can be just as catastrophic. But this wasn't the first time a tailings dam failure had occurred. It follows a pattern of similar incidents, most notably the earlier Mariana disaster in 2015, which also involved Vale. The lessons learned from Brumadinho will shape how mining operations are held accountable for their environmental impact moving forward. However, this was not the only failure caused by poor design. In France, a dam's structural flaws led to another deadly disaster. The Malpass Dam was built in the 1950s to meet the growing demand for water in the region. Its design was meant to be robust, a concrete arch dam meant to withstand pressure from the water it was holding back. However, the real problem lay in the ground beneath it. The engineers didn't fully account for the underlying geology of the area, specifically the presence of a fault line running beneath the dam. As water filled the reservoir, the weight began to exert immense pressure on the dam's structure. Combined with cracks in the foundation, which went undetected during construction, this created a ticking time bomb. On the day of the collapse, the dam structure failed catastrophically. A large section of the dam crumbled, sending a massive wave of water rushing down into the valley below. The floodwater surged with such power that it destroyed everything in its path, including homes, bridges, and roads. The impact was particularly devastating for the town of Frejus, which was directly in the path of the flood. The surge of water tore through buildings, sending debris flying and leaving thousands stranded. The disaster resulted in at least 423 confirmed deaths, though some reports suggest the toll could have been higher. But what made the collapse even more tragic was the fact that there were earlier warning signs that went unheeded. The dam had been leaking in the months leading up to the failure. Engineers had noted the leaks, but did not take sufficient action to address the potential danger. Had the issue been properly investigated or repaired, the collapse might have been prevented. The Malpass disaster sparked widespread outrage and prompted an investigation into the dam's construction. It quickly became clear that the tragedy was a result of poor planning and oversight. The lack of attention to the geological conditions, coupled with an inadequate response to the early signs of failure, revealed major flaws in the dam's safety protocols. But the next disaster wasn't caused by neglect. It was the result of one of the most devastating airstrikes in history. Let's move to Germany. The Ruhr Valley was home to a series of dams, including the Möhne, Eder, and Sorpe dams. These dams were critical for providing water to the region's industrial plants, including factories producing steel, coal, and other essential materials for the war. The Allies, particularly the Royal Air Force, sought to cripple this industrial base by destroying the dams. But rather than simply bombing them with traditional munitions, the RAF developed a unique weapon: the bouncing bomb. The bouncing bomb was designed to skip along the surface of the water, bouncing over obstacles like barbed wire before striking the dam wall. The operation involved flying at low altitudes to drop these bombs accurately. It was an incredibly dangerous mission, with high risks of failure and significant loss of life for the attacking airmen. On the night of May 16, 1943, 19 Lancasters set off on the mission. By the early hours of May 17th, the first bombers had reached their targets. The Möhne and Eder dams were breached, sending enormous floods downstream. The water surged through the valley, destroying everything in its path: farms, villages, and industrial plants. Thousands of people were left homeless, and at least 1,600 civilians died as a result of the flooding. The damage to the region's infrastructure was massive, and the industrial output in the area was significantly crippled, at least temporarily. The devastation caused by the bombing was not just a military success, it was also a humanitarian disaster. The floodwaters from the destroyed dams wiped out entire villages, and the civilian casualties were tragic. The attack also had far-reaching consequences for the local population, as it disrupted the livelihood of many who depended on the valley's agriculture and industry. However, the bombing was not as effective as the Allies had hoped. While it did cause significant damage to the industrial infrastructure, it didn't have the long-term crippling effect on Germany's war production that was initially anticipated. The country quickly began repairs on the dams, and other areas of the Ruhr Valley were able to continue operations, albeit with some difficulty. The event raised ethical questions about the collateral damage of wartime operations and highlighted the unpredictability of bombing as a strategic tool. Let's now move back to the United States, where the collapse of the South Fork Dam led to one of the most infamous floods in history. On May 31, 1889, one of the deadliest and most infamous dam failures in American history occurred when the South Fork Dam, located in the Appalachian Mountains of Pennsylvania, collapsed. The disaster unleashed a catastrophic flood that devastated the town of Johnstown, located 14 miles downstream. Let's break down what happened. The South Fork Dam was originally built in 1853 to hold water for a reservoir that supplied the canal system. In the 1880s, the dam was repurposed and sold to a group of wealthy industrialists who used the area as a private retreat. Under their ownership, however, the dam's maintenance and safety took a drastic downturn. Instead of adhering to standard safety protocols, the dam was poorly maintained. The spillway, which was meant to allow excess water to flow safely out of the reservoir, was either too small or clogged. As a result, when the region experienced an especially heavy rainfall in the days leading up to the disaster, the water level in the reservoir rose dangerously high. Despite growing concerns about the dam's condition, no action was taken to repair or strengthen it. On the morning of May 31, 1889, after a period of intense rain, the South Fork Dam could no longer withstand the pressure. At around 3:10 p.m., the dam suddenly gave way. The massive wall of water that was released surged down the valley toward the town of Johnstown. When the flood hit, the town was unprepared. The wall of water, moving at an estimated 40 miles per hour, was over 30 feet high in places. It swept away homes, businesses, bridges, and anything else in its path. Entire families were wiped out as the floodwaters consumed everything. The destruction was so severe that it was said that not a trace remained of the homes that had been there. The flood caused widespread chaos, with people being trapped in the wreckage and unable to escape. The immediate aftermath was tragic. Over 2,200 people were killed, and thousands more were left homeless. In addition to the human toll, the damage to infrastructure was immense. Railroads, bridges, and factories were destroyed, and much of the town of Johnstown was reduced to rubble. The disaster became an international story, with people all over the world shocked by the scale of the tragedy. The collapse of the South Fork Dam can largely be attributed to negligence. The dam's owners were wealthy industrialists who had little regard for the safety of the local population. They had made several changes to the dam that weakened its structural integrity, including reducing the size of the spillway and failing to maintain the dam properly. There was also a lack of oversight from state authorities, who did not enforce any meaningful safety regulations for such structures. Our next stop takes us to Italy, where the Viant Dam failure would cause even more devastation. The Viant Dam was built to harness the waters of the Viant River and generate hydroelectric power. Engineers considered the dam an incredible feat of modern engineering, designed to provide power to the region and improve the economy. However, the dam's location was problematic from the start. It was situated at the base of a mountain, and experts had concerns about the stability of the land around it. In the years leading up to the disaster, there were warnings about the potential for landslides in the area, but these concerns were largely ignored. In the summer of 1963, engineers began to notice increasing signs of instability in the area surrounding the dam. A massive section of the mountain above the dam began to shift, and cracks were detected in the hillside. Despite these warnings, the decision was made to continue operating the dam as usual. On the night of October 9th, the inevitable happened. A huge landslide, triggered by a combination of the unstable mountainside and the weight of the water in the reservoir, crashed into the Viant Reservoir at an alarming speed. The dam itself didn't fail. However, the landslide displaced an enormous volume of water, sending it rushing over the top of the dam, creating a catastrophic wave that swept across the valley below. This massive wave of water, estimated to be 100 meters, 330 feet, high, smashed into the towns of Longarone, Pirago, and other villages along the valley. The devastation was immediate and overwhelming. Entire villages were submerged in a matter of minutes. Buildings, homes, and roads were obliterated by this huge wall of water, and more than 1,900 people lost their lives. The flood was so powerful that it carried debris and wreckage for miles, leaving behind a scene of utter destruction. But what makes the Viant disaster even more controversial is the role of human negligence in the tragedy. The engineers and officials involved in the dam's construction had received numerous warnings about the risk of landslides and the instability of the surrounding mountainside. However, instead of taking the necessary precautions or halting operations, they continued to increase the water level in the reservoir. In fact, the landslide occurred when the reservoir was at its fullest, making the dam's failure even more catastrophic. In the aftermath of the disaster, investigations revealed that the company that built the dam, along with government officials, had ignored several critical warnings. The most damning evidence was that the geological instability of the area had been known for years, yet little was done to address it. The engineers failed to account for the potential of such a large landslide, and they did not take action to evacuate the residents in the affected areas. The entire disaster could have been avoided had proper risk assessments and safety measures been put in place. The Viant disaster remains one of the most tragic examples of engineering failure, and its legacy is still felt today. It led to significant changes in dam safety regulations and the way that engineers assess the stability of land surrounding dams. Next, we'll look at another catastrophic dam failure. This time in India. The Matchchu Dam 2, built on the Matchchu River, was an earthen dam designed to help manage water for irrigation purposes. The dam had been constructed in the 1950s, and in 1979, it was holding a significant amount of water due to heavy rainfall in the region. The area around the dam had been experiencing consistent monsoon rains, which led to an increase in the water level in the reservoir. While the dam was initially designed to hold back water from seasonal floods, its ability to withstand extreme conditions was questionable. In the days leading up to the disaster, the water level in the reservoir was dangerously high. Engineers had become concerned, but there was a general underestimation of the threat the dam was facing. On the morning of August 11, 1979, a series of warning signs, including small leaks, began to appear along the dam's structure. But the local authorities, who were responsible for overseeing the safety of the dam, did not act quickly enough to assess or address the situation. The inevitable happened when a large breach occurred on the morning of August 11th. The dam's earthen structure gave way, releasing an enormous volume of water into the surrounding area. The floodwaters rushed down the valley, tearing through villages and towns in its path. The town of Morbi, which was situated downstream from the dam, bore the brunt of the destruction. The waters swept through the area with such force that homes were completely destroyed, bridges were washed away, and infrastructure was obliterated. The disaster was swift and brutal. Thousands of people were killed, with estimates ranging from 1,500 to 2,000 lives lost. In addition to the immediate loss of life, the collapse of the dam severely disrupted local agriculture, as the floodwaters wiped out crops and ruined the fertile land that many families relied on for their livelihoods. The causes of the Matchchu Dam 2 failure were a combination of poor engineering practices, lack of maintenance, and inadequate response to warning signs. The dam had been poorly constructed, and its design was not robust enough to handle the large amounts of water it was holding back. It was later revealed that there had been previous concerns about the dam's stability, but no real action had been taken to reinforce or inspect it thoroughly. Last but not the least, let's move on to one of the deadliest dam failures in history. Built in 1952 with Soviet blueprints, Banko was hailed as an iron dam for its 25.5-meter-thick clay core and 492 million cubic meter capacity. Typhoon Nina lit the fuse. From August 5th to 7th, it dumped a year's worth of rain in 24 hours. The Banko Dam, designed to withstand a 1-in-1,000-year flood, faced water levels that overwhelmed its capacity. In just a few days, the area was hit with more than 1,000 millimeters, nearly 40 inches of rain, an amount far beyond what the dam was designed to handle. As the water level in the reservoir reached record highs, the Banko Dam began to show signs of stress. The authorities, aware of the growing danger, attempted to release some of the water to alleviate the pressure, but the storm was simply too powerful. The dam's spillway, already overburdened, couldn't handle the deluge. By the early hours of August 8, 1975, the dam finally gave way, triggering a domino collapse of 61 other dams and killing between 26,000 and 230,000 people. The flooding was so severe that entire towns were swept away, leaving behind nothing but devastation. In total, over 11 million people were affected by the disaster, and at least 230,000 lives were lost. The floodwaters wiped out entire villages, farms, and infrastructure, causing a ripple effect that lasted for years. The Chinese government suppressed news of the disaster for over 30 years. It wasn't until 2005 that the full scale of the tragedy became known to the outside world. In addition to the staggering loss of life, the collapse also created long-term environmental and social consequences. The floodwaters ruined crops, leading to widespread food shortages. Waterborne diseases like cholera spread rapidly in the aftermath, and the sheer number of displaced people overwhelmed the local authorities, making recovery efforts difficult. It took years to fully rebuild the affected areas, and many communities were left struggling to recover from the emotional and financial toll of the disaster. Since 2000, dam failures have dropped 60% thanks to remote sensing and stricter laws. But 17,000 high-risk dams still operate worldwide, many in earthquake zones or downstream from growing cities. The next Banko might be in California's Oroville Dam, recently repaired after its 2017 spillway collapse, or Pakistan's Tarbela Dam, weakened by sediment buildup. So, what do you think? Are we doomed to repeat these disasters, or can technology and transparency outpace greed and neglect? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. See you soon in our next video.